Hey everyone, welcome back to The Tent, your place for politics, policy, and progress. I'm Colin Seaberger.
And filling in for Daniela Gibbs-Leger, I'm lead producer Erin Phillips. Colin, there's a chill in the air. I'm very excited.
There is. It is fall, which means that Election Day is just right around the corner. That and Halloween are kind of what I equate with quintessential fall for me. So I can't believe it. It's already here. And we're just diving right in.
We're rolling along. Well, Speaking of the time of year, I heard you chatted about the election this week with one of our colleagues.
That's right. I spoke with Laura Rodriguez, Vice President of Government Affairs at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. We discussed how the candidates are reaching Hispanic and Latino voters, what impact those efforts could have on the election, and the politicization of hurricane recovery following Helene and Milton.
Really timely topics, to be sure, but first, we have to get to some news.
We do. And listen, I know we talked last week about the candidates and their presence in the media in light of some recent appearances, but we've got to revisit this topic because it's been coming up again and again over the course of the last week. We all know Vice President Harris and Governor Walz have been on a media blitz lately. Governor Walz was on Fox News Sunday a couple consecutive weeks. Vice President Harris is out there on 60 Minutes, Call Her Daddy, Stephen Colbert's show, ABC's The View, Univision. The list goes on and on. She also went on Fox News on Wednesday, and her campaign is reportedly in discussions about a potential appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast. Yeah. And, it's important that they're doing that because, the campaign has to reach voters of all political stripes, right? And that means taking your message everywhere that there's an audience. So she's also held a town hall in Detroit this week with Charlamagne tha God, who's a popular Black radio host. She's really meeting voters where they're at and answering tough questions. And, she's opting both for traditional media as well as non-traditional media. And because of that, she's been able to do some key outreach to key demographic groups like young voters, Hispanic voters, Black voters, male voters, independents, and of course, disaffected Republicans. And all of that stands in super stark contrast to Donald Trump, who is clearly not happy with all the attention that Vice President Harris is getting. He's been lashing out at Fox News all week for daring to speak with her, calling them weak and soft on Democrats, claiming, the occasional Democratic voice on the network they have is basically owning the network, right? And saying that Fox isn't worthwhile anymore. Remind me when political candidates get to call the shots at media networks in this country. I didn't think that was how it worked.
Yeah, I think never, Colin, is the answer. It's pretty wild stuff. And I imagine he's maybe lashing out because he's worried. That's my best guess. Vice President Harris is handling challenging interviews with grace and poise, even on unfriendly turf. Meanwhile, Trump refuses to even keep the interviews he already has on the books. I mean, just in the last week and a half, he's backed out of interviews with 60 Minutes and now CNBC. He'll only do interviews where he can basically ramble to sympathetic right-wing hosts. And that's because, quite frankly, he's struggling, even at this point with his own town halls. Over the weekend, he spent 39 minutes of a town hall swaying on stage and dancing to songs from his campaign playlist after shutting down questions. It was very weird.
So bizarre.
If he can't even answer questions from his own supporters, it's no wonder he doesn't want to talk to journalists who might ask him about his failed record, for example, his peddling of dangerous lies and conspiracies, or, God forbid, his actual policy plans for a second term. Look, the American people need to know who they're choosing between in a couple weeks and what each candidate's policies are. Media interviews are a key part of that learning process, but only one candidate is taking them seriously.
Hear, hear, Erin. It's wild to me how constantly the media was obsessed with President Biden for every little slip up that he would make here or there on the campaign trail when he was running for office. Yet how little they cover Donald Trump's own unraveling that's happening before our very eyes, not to mention the fact that he refuses to release his medical records or, appear on 60 Minutes, just like every other major candidate for president in modern American politics, right? But speaking of Trump and the media, here to talk about some of his most outlandish anti-democratic proposals is Mike Sozan, senior fellow at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. Mike, thanks so much for joining us on The 10.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
So after Vice President Harris's 60 Minutes interview aired, Donald Trump railed against CBS and made all sorts of, fantastical false claims about the network, including that CBS was trying to censor the interview by editing it down, seemingly to make Harris look better. He also called for the FCC to revoke the network's broadcast license. Why did Trump make these claims, and what's so unprecedented about them coming from a presidential candidate?
I think Trump is angry. He is angry for CBS for daring to show an interview that does not align with his distorted view of reality. He did not like that CBS edited the interview with Kamala Harris. And
just as they do with candidates left, right, center, and have done for decades.
Exactly. News organizations do this all the time. Unless an interview is live, they're always going to be editing, sometimes just to make sure that it fits in the time frame that they have allotted for it. Trump's favorite channels, Fox News and others, edit things all the time.
Yeah.
But he was mad at CBS. He is worried about the state of the race, I would guess, and he might even be angry that CBS dared to do a little fact checking during the vice presidential debate when they had originally said they were not going to. He's actually, I think, lucky that they didn't do a lot more fact checking of his VP running mate, J.D. Vance. But this is CBS exercising its First Amendment right. It has every right to edit interviews. And I think what is unprecedented here, going to the other part of your question, is you have a presidential candidate calling for broadcast licenses to be revoked. For CBS to lose its broadcast license, its ability to be on the airwaves, giving news and information to the American people. I mean, that's a violation of the First Amendment. As we know, presidents are supposed to be upholding the Constitution, not violating it. And so, and of course, presidents and candidates, all lawmakers have let's say, a love-hate relationship with the media, but this takes the hate part of it to a whole different level.
I'd also suggest that Trump probably wanted to change the story because CBS's own program that night walked viewers through his declination to continue with the interview that he had previously agreed to. And boy, Scott Pelley's monologue on that segment was absolute fire.
Yeah, that's a good point, Colin. And we've seen this before. Trump has laid out this really thorough blueprint for consolidating presidential power if he's elected to serve a second term. The kind of power he could use to do things like, revoke broadcast licenses. So what does his tirade against CBS tell us more broadly about what freedom of speech or freedom of the press might look like during a second Trump presidency? And specifically, I'd love for you to address those out there who might say, well, Trump was president before and this kind of crackdown never materialized. Why should we believe these kinds of things would happen if he returned to the White House?
It's a great question. I mean, if Trump gets reelected, make no mistake, he will assail the media and he will attack the media's First Amendment rights and the First Amendment rights of any Americans with whom he disagrees. I mean, we hear this argument a lot from people that what Trump had been threatening never materialized in his first term as president. So it's not going to materialize if he's reelected. But there are various reasons for why we should believe Trump this time, what he says. I mean, the main overarching reason is the guardrails are going to be off if he gets reelected. But so this time around, he's being much more direct in what he's saying. He's telling us his specific plans to weaken the media. Last time around when he was president, he kind of hinted at a few things, but this time he's being much more direct.
He's literally campaigning on authoritarian behavior.
He
in
is.
policies.
Absolutely. And he's also following the authoritarian guidebook, which is Project 2025. That authoritarian roadmap laid out a number of ways to destroy checks and balances and weaken the independent media in this country. And I recently co-wrote a report on that topic for the Center for American Progress with my co-author Ben Olinsky, where we really talked about an issue that I know you all have talked about, which is how an imperial presidency is going to be created. It's going to be really dangerous for Americans. And part of this is he's going to install loyalists, political allies at the Federal Communications Commission or the Department of Justice, which can then assail these media companies. He's going to use the power of the government to do that. And even if, let's say, a license is not revoked from a media company or a reporter is not actually jailed because the justice system holds up and doesn't allow it, the mere threat of these things can have a chilling effect on reporters.
Sure.
We know that, and we've seen the chilling effect it can have, and that's deeply damaging for democracy as well.
I mean, being bullied into not having a fact-checking process for the VP debate, right?
Exactly.
I mean, coming out of the first presidential debate. There's an example of that chilling effect.
Right. The fact that this is even open for debate in this day and age, that media companies and reporters should not be able to fact check in real time when there's a debate. It's amazing we've reached this point. And some Americans might say, well, how does this really matter to me? Well, guess what? You get your news and your information from some of these trusted news sources from across the political spectrum. All of them could be in danger of being taken off the air, and the trusted news sources for communities and for families could go up in smoke the next day that if Trump decides to do it.
It's absolutely just terrifying. Another thing that's quite terrifying and is in line with Trump's authoritarian obsessions, in recent days, he said that he would deploy the military against Americans who oppose his candidacy if he's elected. One, can he do that? And two, even if he can't, what does it mean for democracy that he wants to? I mean, this is something we've seen from authoritarians and fascists in other countries, but here in the United States?
Exactly. And, I know more of us are using the term fascism or authoritarianism, and that rubs some people the wrong way. And some people say you shouldn't be using those terms. You should be taking down the rhetoric. Of course, there have been some assassination attempts against Trump, and he's tried to blame it on the left. And I try to be really careful with the words that I choose, as I know you all do as well on this podcast. But there are times when we have to actually use the right words and define what we're talking about. And these recent threats from Trump in the past few days are the favorite tools of fascists through history. These are tools of current-day authoritarians as well. And so let's be clear about what he's saying. In the past several months, he has said that he's very open to actually wanting to use the U.S. military, deploying them at the southern border, for example, to help get control of the border. Okay, that's one thing. He's also said that he wants to use the military against unrest in big cities, against unruly protesters. And he actually tried to do that at least once before, and his military kept him from doing that. But this goes a whole other step. This is him saying he wants to use the military to go against his political opponents. Our laws really should prevent him from doing that, the laws that we have on the books, but our laws aren't always written in airtight ways. There's some wiggle room in the laws sometimes, and especially when you get an authoritarian who's willing to and wanting to burst through those laws and to use all of the wiggle room. Luckily, as I said last time, we had some guardrails in place. We had military generals or the defense secretary who were pushing back on Trump and preventing some of the worst abuses. But going to your question, Colin, this time around, if Trump is willing to break the law and political norms, the consequences are going to be huge. We're not going to have people surrounding him are going to push back. We know that he's going to surround himself with yes people. And so the consequences for everyday Americans can be huge. For example, what if there's a pride parade? Or what if there's an abortion rights rally with everyday Americans, our friends, our neighbors, people that we associate with all the time, ourselves, doing these sorts of things? who's to say that Trump will not use the military to crack down on those sorts of just regular protests, the things that we share in common as Americans, the values, the right to protest, the right to free speech, the right to share our views, even if we don't agree with each other all the time. Political norms and the laws have always been on the books to allow this sort of political dialogue. And now we're really coming up against the very real possibility that we're going to have an authoritarian president who would really crack down on any sort of political opposition.
Well, that is all very bleak, but thank you so much for helping us break it down. It's a really important conversation, and thanks for joining us on The Tent.
I really appreciate you having me on.
That's all the time we have for today. If there's anything else you'd like us to cover on the pod, hit us up on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at The Tent Pod. That's at The Tent Pod.
And stick around for my interview with Laura Rodriguez in just a beat. Laura Rodriguez is Vice President for Government Affairs at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. Before that, she served as Chief of Staff to Congresswoman Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, Senior Advisor for former Senator Bill Nelson for Latino Policy, and Chief of Staff at the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute. She also worked for the United States State Department and the City of Miami Commission. Laura Rodriguez, thanks so much for joining us on The Tent.
Thank you so much for having me, Colin. This is amazing.
I have so much that we need to talk about. I feel like I'm struggling to find, where we should begin, but I want to start with immigration because Donald Trump has been leaning in on disinformation about migrant communities so much over the course of the last few weeks, so I feel like we need to unpack some of that. We've heard increasingly dehumanizing and anti-immigrant rhetoric from Donald Trump during his campaign, including just bonkers claims of Venezuelan street gangs have, quote-unquote, overtaken Aurora, Colorado. And time and again, he's appeared totally comfortable inciting violence to boost his campaign. Can you talk about what kind of impacts does this depraved, cruel rhetoric have on communities? And, what's your sense on how Hispanic and Latino voters are feeling about Trump's extreme immigration policies, like wanting to deport lawful migrants or, supporting family separation, right? Can you talk about, what the response is to those things?
Absolutely. On the first part of your question, I think it's really interesting that we've seen in Aurora, as well as in Springfield, Ohio, where he attacked Haitian migrants, Republican elected officials coming out and saying, this is not true. In Springfield, we saw the governor saying, hey, these people are a part of our community. We needed them here. We want them here. They're great. They're hard workers.
They're here legally.
They're here legally also, yes. And in Aurora, you saw the Republican mayor saying, like, none of this is true. The fact that he continues to pull, quote unquote, facts out of the air and just, repeat nonsense is not only dangerous, but it also begins to really separate and divide, as we're already pretty divided. And he just keeps fueling that fire of division. I think I've mentioned this before where I said, if you can look at someone else and they're different from you in any way, and you can point to them and say, that person is the reason that you don't have a job. That is the reason you don't have a house. I mean, look at their housing policy. Their housing policy is to deport a bunch of migrants so that there's more housing available. I mean, it's ridiculous.
What migrants are, coming across the border and immediately buying up a bunch of homes,
Can't
right?
wait to meet those people. I mean, bring them. We need their money. But the fact is, it's that continuation of that division that really is harming the country. And it's what a lot of people are really, really sick of. On your second question about how Latinos are reacting to it, that's a super complicated answer. So there are certainly those who feel like the rhetoric is dangerous, evil, horrible. They remember the family separation policy, which was horrifying, watching little kids ripped away from their parents and screaming and crying and then in cages. I mean, no one can forget those photos. But there are certainly other Latinos that do not see themselves in that rhetoric. Paola Ramos just wrote a book called Defector. I haven't had a chance to read it, but I did get to see an interview with her talking about it. And it is about exploring this Latino who is so assimilated and so Americanized, sometimes second, third generation, but even sometimes first generation, but they're so assimilated. They don't see themselves in that rhetoric. They see themselves as more American than Latino. And so they don't hear it as a threat to them, even though Trump and his people would never make the distinction. But they don't think of it that way. They don't think that it's about them. And they're also in that same kind of category. Lots of Latinos who say, well, I came here legally and I did the whole process. And why should people just get it to, run over the border and come in and do whatever they want? And sadly, it's that lack of empathy and that lack of connection that it makes the question really complicated. But we certainly have a lot of work to do to make sure that we're connecting the dots for Latino communities and all communities on that.
For sure, for sure. So Vice President Harris's words and actions really stand in stark contrast to, what we're hearing and seeing from Donald Trump. I'm thinking in particular of her recent Univision town hall. I'm curious for your thoughts on how you thought it went, as well as, what was the importance of the compassion that she showed? I'm thinking particularly there was a young woman in the audience who got to ask a question whose mother died before being able to get her citizenship. What does Harris's response to, questions like that say about both her policy approach as well as, her kind of emotional capacity in order to be able to effectively serve as president of the United States?
Yeah. No, thanks for asking that. It was a really important interaction. I think, first of all, the woman who asked the question made that distinction of both of her parents had immigration issues. Her father was able to find a path to citizenship. Her mother was not, and therefore her mother was not able to get the care that she needed and died probably before she should have. And the humanity that you saw from Kamala Harris is so, again, in stark difference from Trump, right? It's that humanity. I mean, it was a genuine reaction of empathy and of understanding where she was coming from. And I think
having
that was
lost
important.
her own mom,
exactly.
right?
And having to take care of her mother as well in those last days. And so aside from that part, which she answered the question with empathy, with ideas for how to fix the issue, I think the other part of that is when the cameras were kind of off, when the show was over, town hall was over, there was a picture or maybe a short video of her going up to her afterwards. After the town hall was done, Kamala Harris walked over to that woman and just talked to her. And you could see them clasping hands. And it's that humanity that you want in a leader and you understand. But there was actually one other interaction that I thought was really, really important.
Let's talk about it.
There was a gentleman who got up and asked about how Joe Biden was put aside from the ticket. He said he was leaning towards Trump, but he wanted to understand what happened. He didn't think that was a great look. She not only answered the question, she went into depth about it. I think the answer was 6 minutes long. She really explained how it all went down, how she earned all of the other delegates. And then she finished that interaction with, I hope to earn your vote. I think there's something very different with somebody who is saying, vote for me, and there's someone saying, I want to earn your vote. It is a humble request. It is an offer. And I think both that and her humanity, put that together, those are qualities that I think a lot of Latinos and all Americans, but we're talking about Latinos here, Latinos really can empathize with, but also they think those are good qualities to have.
It's a sign of respect.
Exactly. Yeah. She's like, I'm not here to, judge or to demand anything. I'm here to talk to you and see if I can convince you to support me.
Which is, standing in stark contrast to Donald Trump, who this week said that Black and Latino voters who do not vote for him need to have their head examined, which I think is just kind of a perfect compare-contrast between the two candidates. So swing states are going to be really critical in less than 3 weeks' time, right? And Hispanic and Latino voters within several of those states are going to have kind of a huge impact in terms of determining, how the states end up ultimately voting. Latino and Hispanic voters are certainly not a monolith, and there are so many issues that really matter to them. But I'm curious how you think the presidential campaigns are doing so far in courting those voters, and are either of them, really hitting the right notes?
It is the $100 million question. The Latino constituency of voters is the fastest growing in the country. And so both parties, I think, have acknowledged that and have really tried to make sure that they are talking to them early and often. The Republican side has done that in a very distinct way. You can see Trump really trying to get the attention of Latino males, which we understand, are starting to kind of look at him differently. But there's two things that I would point out. With the Biden-Harris administration, just on the official side to start with, I saw something 3.5 years ago that I'd never seen before in the official side. And that was day one, they were talking to Latinos. They were making sure that they got things out to them in their language, in Spanglish and English and Spanish, all the things from day one. Because always the criticism has always been like, oh, well, you come around every 4 years and, no, you never show up. They took that to heart and they just went forth from day one to communicate with this community. That's 3.5 years. There's a little more work to be done. But I think that we got to keep that up. We got to keep talking all the time to these folks. On the campaign side, I will tell you from personal experience, I don't get a single news release or absolutely anything from the campaign in English that I do not immediately get in Spanish right after. I've never seen that before either. It's really incredible. They want the information out to everyone and to reach as many people as possible. They want their surrogates to be able to communicate in those languages and just get it out there. Really, really smart and really agile since they they've only had, less than 100 days on this, right? And then one other thing that I'll say is that they're doing a lot of Spanish canvassing, which is also, I think, new, at least to me. I'm sure there have always been, but I think they're putting more of an effort on trying to get Spanish speakers to these swing states specifically to talk to folks in their language. And I think what they're finding, and what I'm seeing that they're finding, is that Latinos are very open to Kamala, and they just wanted to hear from someone in their language. They wanted to hear what she was all about because they don't always have time to be engaged in politics all the time, like many Americans. And so once they hear from them, they're like ready to go. They're like, yeah, absolutely. So it's that hard work of the one-on-one that we have to do with all voters. And so Latino voters are right there as well. And I do believe that they're making a really, really good and concerted effort with this community.
Interesting. I'm also curious to talk to you as a Floridian. Obviously, we at the Tent have been following closely the devastating storms, both Helene and Milton, over the course of the last month. And I hope that, all of your relatives and friends in Florida are safe. But we've also seen Trump and others have tried to actually politicize these natural disasters, spreading misinformation and, once again, inciting violence. We saw FEMA workers threatened in North Carolina this week, forcing them to evacuate in the middle of their own operations. How is the spread of misinformation affecting recovery efforts? And how do you think that this issue might impact the election?
Well, on the election, just to take that last question first, on the election piece, we do have a real danger of it having a real effect, right? We're talking about North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Florida is maybe not such a swing state as as it has been in the past, but it could be. It's certainly, more leaning towards red, but I like to think it's still a little purple. But North Carolina and Georgia, I think we've all seen, continue to move into that swing state territory. And when you have these disasters hitting and then not the government and the state government not allowing for voter registration to be extended, for ballots, mail-in ballots to have an extended date as well. That's a real problem. That's a disenfranchisement problem. And that could certainly be an issue. We won't obviously know until afterwards, but it's a very concerning part of the disaster aftermath. On the FEMA and disinformation front, Florida in particular is always a difficult place to get facts from the state government. Ron DeSantis, what we saw from the beginning, from his very first press conference, that no matter what was happening and who was there, it was the Ron DeSantis show. And it really demonstrates what a wannabe dictator regime could look like. And so he doesn't use his power to, squash some of these terrible conspiracy theories. And we're seeing people, really, really sad stories of people not taking help from FEMA that they are, entitled to, because they've been told that if they take that help, the government's going to take their home.
Oh my gosh.
That's where we are. We are in this kind of bizarre alternative universe where what the government tells you, they don't even believe it. If it doesn't come from Trump or the MAGA world, then they don't believe it. And there are people who are going hungry and who are not in shelters and who are not taking this help. Family members desperate to help them, and they won't do it because of these conspiracy theories. Incredibly dangerous and really sad. And I think we'll hear about deaths at some point because of this.
Yeah. I also think, it's really kind of a stark warning sign to, what sort of mis and disinformation that we could see following the election. So that is something that we at the 10 are going to be keeping very, very close eye on because we know, just how devastating, the big lie and other sort of mis and disinformation can be both to our democracy as well as to the safety and security of the American people, right? Well, Laura, it's the end of Hispanic Heritage Month, and on a very different note, I'm curious if you could talk about, what you're thinking about kind of looking forward for the Hispanic and Latino community as we look toward Election Day and beyond.
Sure. So one of the things that I've noticed that we've seen in the Latino community is similar to others. We're going to see, I think, a pretty big gender gap. I think the men and the women are continuing to separate a bit. I believe that there are ebbs and flows on these things. And so I do think that will certainly come back not the other way, but it'll come back closer. But Latina women are really seem to be really supportive of the policies being put forth by the Harris-Walz campaign. They are very energized, they're coming out, and they're very, very vocal. So I'm seeing that piece. And the other thing that I'm watching is folks who might not be super comfortable in their community saying out loud that they're going to vote for Harris-Walz or Trump-Vance, right? Those folks who are just kind of keeping it to themselves, maybe don't answer to pollsters or say something that they're not actually going to do. We've seen that in previous polling before. And I have a personal anecdote that I think can illustrate some of that. When I was in Miami in 2008, and I had taken a leave of absence to work on the campaign for the last 2 weeks. And a friend of mine and I, who were canvassing and just decked out in Obama gear from head to toe, stopped in at a restaurant in Little Havana, a Cuban restaurant, which was, brave. And we were sat in the middle of the restaurant. And I noticed that there was an older gentleman that kept kind of looking over at us. And I was a little nervous that maybe he was not happy that we were there.
Oh.
And I was like, uh-oh, what's going to happen? And as he and his party were leaving the restaurant, they walked right past us. And he came right up to me and he whispered in my ear, "Go Obama." And it just kind of opened my eyes. And I thought maybe for the first time in that election, I was like, maybe he does have a shot to win Florida. There were, it was a memorable moment. And I do think that there are a lot of similarities between 2008 and 2016. I would say the energy level and the newness and the youth of the Harris-Walz ticket is probably pretty attractive to a lot of Latinos.
Interesting. Well, Laura Rodriguez, that is all the time we have for today. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us on the 10th.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
All right, folks, that's all the time we have this week. Please do check out our previous episodes. Erin, we do need to talk, though. We are less than 3 weeks from Election Day, and I don't know about you, but my anxiety is through the roof, and I'm looking for basically any outlet I can find to try to relax.
Absolutely. I'm in the same boat. I think we all are.
Yeah. And for me, recently I started watching Love is Blind season 7, the DC Love is Blind, which I guess actually is not really DC. Apparently it's Arlington.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I haven't watched it. I mean, folks will know if they've seen me on here before. I'm not a huge reality TV girly, but I am enjoying watching it from a distance and learning. I loved learning about the casting. I was so shocked that they only had one consultant. Out of the entire DC casting, they had only one person who was a consultant.
That is shocking.
Yeah.
Also shocking, I guess one of the contestants works in the adjoining office to my husband's office in his building, right?
Wow, T.
Yeah, I know. It's so crazy. Apparently, like, a former coworker of his has been like, oh, yeah, like, I used to see her in the hallway when I'd, like, go to the restroom and stuff like that. Small world DC is.
Yeah.
Also, I gotta say, the love triangle that has been Nick D and Hannah and Brittany has been the craziest thing that I wasn't anticipating when I settled in to watch Love is Blind. But, watching him be like, telling Hannah, like, Hannah or was it Brittany? No, it was Brittany. He straight up told Brittany, like, you came in as my number 2, and now, not like, are you my number 1, but he's like, now you're both number 1. I mean, it's a mess. Like, these people are terrible.
Yeah.
And, like, this is not even scratching the surface. I mean, there's another guy who is an art dealer.
Cool.
Yeah, cool. Family business, I guess, right? But he's like, I literally have so much money. I mean, it's so
Love that for
wild,
him.
right? He's like, that's what I'm insecure about, is like, I don't have to worry about anything, and I just want a woman who doesn't want me for my money, and yada, yada, yada. Like, ugh, barf.
You don't feel bad for him, Colin?
No, I do not. But then there are also these really cool connections between folks like Garrett and folks like Taylor, who are an interracial couple, right? Or Steven and Monica, who are an interracial couple, right? And seeing them kind of go through this experience, right? Obviously, kind of not knowing the other person's kind of physical appearance and whatnot, right? Watching them go through the process of, like, making a connection, talking about, like, how their own lived experiences have shaped the people who they are, has been really cool. And, I like that the show is giving a little bit of chaos and, just flunking dating 101, right?
Yeah.
And then also there's like these good, genuine relationships. So it's given me everything I was looking for.
I do have to say, I feel like if there was any city where someone would be driven enough to make like a reality show relationship work in the long term, like I feel like people in DC have their eyes on the prize, like they're willing to make it work.
I think you may be onto something, Erin.
Yeah, well, I have been watching a show of my own that's been distracting me in this wonderful Halloween season. I've been watching the new Marvel show, Agatha All Along.
Oh, yes.
Very good. Follow up to WandaVision. It is wonderful. It's very interesting. I feel like we've had like a drought of content that is both Halloween themed but also feel good. I love scary movies. I love scary movies as much as the next scary movie enjoyer, but sometimes during the Halloween season I just want to watch something like Halloween Town or like Hocus Pocus. And last year, I think it was, or a couple years ago, we got Hocus Pocus 2. But other than that, it's like they don't make that kind of stuff anymore where it's just like feel good and like old school, and it has like some of that Halloween flavor. There's witches, there's spells, but like it's not gonna scare you or like make you nervous to be home alone. So I have been really loving that show. There's queer representation in it, which we love. There's songs, there's music. The cast is amazing. It's got Aubrey Plaza in it.
Love Aubrey Plaza.
So many superstars. I think it's really wonderful.
Well, I will add that one to my queue and get to that in the coming weeks. I mean, I guess Halloween is just 2 weeks away.
Right around the corner.
Yeah, right around the corner. Well, with that, folks, I hope you are taking solace in your own Netflix queues and finding some ways to relax. And we'll talk to you next week. The Tent is a podcast from the Center for American Progress Action Fund. It's hosted by me, Colin Seaberger, and co-hosted by Daniela Gibbs-Leger. Aaron Phillips is our lead producer and guest host for this episode. Kelly McCoy is our supervising producer, Mishka Espy is our booking producer, and Muggs Leone is our digital producer. Hi Fan, Matthew Gossage, Olivia Mowry, and Tony Pandolfo are our video team. Views expressed by guests at the Tent are their own, and interviews are not endorsements of a guest's perspectives. You can find us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.